The Lord be with you. Well, here we are, and I am wearing a brand new Nun Life t-shirt. This just came in the mail from camp up north, Covenant Point. This is part of their fundraiser for their One Life retreat, which didn't happen this year, hence the name Nun Life. It turned into a virtual event because they couldn't have the people together because of physical distancing and those kinds of things during these days of COVID. But it's also a play on their verse for the camp, that none of us lives to himself alone, none of us dies to himself alone, but whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. So just very clever. Always good for me to be able to wear some camp merch and support them, raise awareness for them, and also just make a small financial contribution because of all of the things that they're losing this year. But again, we are in the middle of this journey through this season of Lent. This is the fourth full week of Lent. And we have been talking about why it is to connect with God. It is like sort of groping around in the dark. The apostle even points that out for us in the New Testament and says that part of it, at least, is the way God has designed things to be. So we've been looking at these themes of freedom and desire and attachments. And we've just acknowledged that God has made people truly free. We are people of agency. We have a will. We can think on our own. We can make our own decisions. We choose to love or to not love. And even though God has given us that freedom and our relationship has started off very strongly with Him, unfortunately, temptation and giving into temptation has warped our souls and our humanity so much so that now we attach our desires to things that are lesser than God. Even though our true desire, we can't necessarily articulate it and we don't always recognize it, but our true desire is for that good, healthy, loving relationship between creator and creature. Unfortunately, we pursue all of the wrong things, and that's just part of sin. Because we have been born into this slavery to sin, even though Jesus sets us free from sin and death, we still only know the life that we have been living. We only know the world working in the warped, distorted ways that it always does under the power of sin. So we keep perpetuating this pattern. And today we want to sort of acknowledge that this pattern affects even the way that we see ourselves. Our understanding of self is incredibly out of whack because of the distortion of sin and because of not understanding who God is. And we have these moments in our spiritual journey where all of a sudden there is clarity. It's like a Damascus Road moment. All of a sudden we see God, we hear from God, and it's very clear. It's like being on a mountaintop and all of the clouds part. The fog lifts. Our eyes are opened. All of a sudden we just see. And for me, I was able to see the Grand Canyon for the first time this past summer. And what was so interesting was people can tell you about the Grand Canyon and inspire you by their stories. You can see pictures of the Grand Canyon and think that you understand its glory, but it's only when you are there in person and your eyes fill up from periphery to be able to soak in the full breadth and majesty of that incredible place, that you get overwhelmed. You feel very, very small. You are fascinated. You can just stare at it for hours because of its beauty and its incredible awe. And that's what it's like to have one of these God moments, where all of a sudden you stop thinking of yourself the way that you used to. You stop thinking of God in these very simple, almost juvenile sort of ways, and you get a glimpse of him. When that happens for people, we tend to have one of three responses. We can either be overwhelmed with fear, because again, God is so spacious. He is so immeasurable. He is so incredible and awe-inspiring and beautiful that our souls just get overwhelmed. So we become afraid because it's not something we understand and it's not something we can control. So we suppress it, we deny it, we run from that understanding and revelation of himself. Or we can, again, attach our desire to something that's a little bit less than him because we're overwhelmed. So, for example, all of a sudden we reduce the Grand Canyon to its colors. We reduce it to its rock formations. We reduce it to the eagle we saw flying over top of the canyon base. But none of those things in and of themselves are the canyon. The canyon is bigger than that. The canyon is much more unexplainable than that. And God, even more so. So we look for something, Father, Spirit, water, dove. We look for something to pin our understanding of God to, and we make God that thing. Or the final option is we can just be open to the vastness, the spaciousness, the incredible depth and love and wonder of God. But all of those things require choice on our part, and they require discipline on our part. So I want to read for us a passage today, focus on a passage that kind of talks about what it is to live into this incredible, unfathomable experience of God. And this is from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 11 and 12. Where the apostle says, "When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." The apostle seems to indicate for us that there is something more going on behind the scenes than we really understand. And it's a question of growing. It's a question of maturing. 1 Corinthians 13 is a rather famous passage of Scripture because of its description of love. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love doesn't envy. Love doesn't boast. Love never fails. We are so overwhelmed at this flowing poetic description of love that we read it at all events, but we often kind of lose the context of it. 1 Corinthians 13 is part of a larger unit from 12 to 14, where the apostle is talking about spiritual gifts. And unfortunately, the Corinthian churches have been abusing those gifts. They have been infatuated with the more powerful, prominent, selfish gifts. And the apostle has to remind them right in the middle of his argument what love is and why it is superior to just using a gift for the sake of gifts. They had attached their desire to the gift that God gives instead of to God himself. So the apostle has to remind them after he gives this long, flowing description of what love is. You know what? We used to be children, but eventually we grow up. And when we grow up, we need to mature. It's like that in our relationship with God. Right now, we only see partially as if in a mirror. But one day we will see all of the glory of God. Right now we only know a little part of the story of the person of God. But one day we will fully know, even as we are fully known. To be with God is to fully allow ourselves to be known so that we can fully know God. Again, whatever that means. However we're able to soak that in, however we're able to grow in that through eternity. In order to do that, we have to start recognizing how we don't even truly understand ourselves in this life. How do you define yourself when somebody asks who you are, when they introduce themselves to you? Normally we ask for your occupation. Hi, I'm so-and-so. This is what I do. Who are you? What do you do? Sometimes we define ourselves based upon our kids. Well, I'm the parent of so-and-so. Sometimes we define ourselves by our spouse. I'm married to so-and-so. Sometimes we define ourselves by our favorite sports teams and our allegiance to them. All of these are attachments to lesser things. I believe because we don't truly know who we are. All of those other things can be taken from you. You know, your kids can grow up and move away. Your spouse could leave you or perish suddenly. You can lose your job. You can change your job. You can retire from your job. Your sports team can go bankrupt or move to a different city. Even if any or all of those things happen, you still are a person. So who are you at the end of the day? What are you at the end of the day? We keep attaching our identity to things that are less than who we truly are because I think we're afraid of the vastness of our own spirits, of God dwelling within us, of that God-shaped whole that we have been created with. So we don't even know who we are. We have all of these false selves, false masks that are put over top of our true self. It says it this way in the Psalms. This is Psalm 131. My heart is not proud, O Yahweh. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. But I have calmed and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content. Israel, put your hope in Yahweh, both now and forevermore. The words of our eternal God. This psalm is attributed to David, either meaning that he wrote it or that it was written about him or with him in mind. And it's interesting to think of a king and all of the different things that a king would be worried about and saying, you know what, I am not going to think on things that are too wonderful for me. I just want to sit here and be quiet in your arms, O Yahweh. Like a child who is weaned and content, lying in the arms of its mother. You ever think about yourself that way with God? At the end of the day, all of your other accomplishments, all of your other false selves, which you attach your identity to, aren't truly you. And maybe what we need most is just to sit and be content like a child who has no identity, no concerns, no ability to discern things beyond just being comforted in the arms of a parent. That is my challenge for us this Lent, to take some time to truly embrace the spaciousness of God and to not run from it, to not make it something lesser than it is, to not run from our true selves and what we want, who we are, so that we can find ourselves centered in God and truly desire to deepen that relationship. It's not easy to do. As a matter of fact, that's why it requires prayer and fasting and the giving away of some of our resources and our comfort so that we can stop with the distractions and just come back to us in God and where the true desire of our heart is. There is more work to come, more definition to give to it, but spend some time this week focusing, praying, meditating, sitting with God and with who He is and who you are. And in these ongoing days of wilderness, these ongoing days of Lent, may the peace of God be with you. Amen.